Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we've been having interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life since 2014. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola, joining you from the lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, recently known as Victoria, BC, Canada. The topic of our show today is very aligned with the energy of the Beltane season. The Beltane chapter of my book, The Spirited Kitchen, is where you'll find my favorite essay in the whole book because it talks about the weaving of the labor movement and other liberatory movements with the energies of spring, collective mobilization, and ecstatic creative union. In this episode, we're talking about community organizing and attachment. And I hope you'll stick around for the end of the episode to hear about my upcoming online course on moral injury, because it feels very relevant to the topic. We're often driven to collective organizing because of moral injury, and I'm stoked to share more about that. But first things first. My guest today is the multi-talented and endlessly fascinating Aurelie Richards. Aurelie has a BFA in dance and philosophy from the Tisch School of the Arts at New York University. She also has a long history with gardening and permaculture and was at one time an aspiring monastic in Thich Nhat Hanh's community in upstate New York. She has long been an advocate for queer rights, trans community building, and domestic violence prevention, especially in rural and small town contexts. She is a somatic coach, grounding her work in attachment principles and collapse awareness, and has been a member of the Numinous Network since day one. Listeners may remember Aurelie from her last appearance on the show in 2022 when we talked about cultivating sisterhood. I am delighted to welcome back to the show Aurelie Richards, and I opened this episode accidentally calling her by our pet name, like her name of endearment, Mishka, but that's not her public name, my friends. It's just our name for her. So it's Aurelie Richards, mental health professional, somatic coach, Aurelie Richards. She is back, and we're talking about attachment in movement work. So community organizing, workplace unionizing. How can we do this in a way that recognizes the realities of interpersonal neurobiology and in a way that recognizes the value of presencing secure attachment in an environment that naturally brings up a lot of unresolved trauma and a lack of safeness and perhaps even hostility? It's a juicy conversation. It's a great case study. Let's welcome back to the show the wonderful Aurelie Richards. Mishka, welcome back to the Numinous Podcast. So happy to have you back on the show. Please update us. What identities do you lead with now?
It's really nice to be here. Thank you so much, Carmen. Yes, the identities that I lead with at the moment, I feel like it changes quite a lot. But the consistent ones tend to be helper. I'm definitely in a helping role as a mental health professional. And so acupuncture is very much part of my identity as well. I'm focused mostly on addiction recovery, and so I do almost entirely acupuncture on the ears and the head. So yeah, acupuncturist is in there somewhere. And yeah, I'm a woman and I have a trans experience. And those two things are very separate for me. And they continue to be very separate for me. Although one of those both of those identities are politicized, but one of them more than the other. And there's this demand that I pair them together. And I in full and utter defiance of that demand. I'm a woman and I happen to have a trans experience and they intersect, but they are not the same thing. And I'm also a Jewish woman living in Germany. and I'm an English speaker. I'm a German speaker. I'm learning to be a Yiddish speaker as a reclamation of that ancestry, which is really exciting. And those are the identities I'm leading with at the moment. Yeah, I think there are
Thank
others
you.
to name, but that's it.
All right. There are others, and we're here to talk about some of them. Our conversation today is going to be about organizing, community organizing, specifically labor organizing. First of all, let's set the scene here. You live in Berlin, so tell us just a little bit about like worker rights and labor law in Germany, and what was it about your workplace that made you feel it was time to unionize?
Okay, so I'll start with the context of the like labor laws and just the general scene in well, Germany as a whole and Berlin, which have different qualities to the workplace, for sure. So I lived in Leipzig for a long time, so I was much more integrated into German society, and yeah, that's a big part of my experience as someone. I did grow up in the States. I grew up in California. Um, and so, but what often happens for English speakers is they kind of get siloed into living in Berlin,
Mm.
because it's such an international city. The de facto international language in Europe is English. Um, and so, yeah, you have a lot of English speakers who kind of are like living in like an expat bubble that's sort of like placed on top of a German city. Um, and so then what you also have is an influx of VC money, and you have the German government also investing in tech companies, and you have a really, really strong startup culture. And that's not only in tech, it also plays out in academia and other places in Berlin. So you've got displaced people who are not well integrated into the society, deliberately so. This is very deliberate in a way where it's an attempt to make Berlin much more international. And at the same time, there's a lot of cultural, social, historical resistance to integration. For those who, maybe some people don't want to. They just kind of want to pass through Berlin for a couple of years and move on. But for, you know, yeah, folks like me who actually like wanted to, ich bin angekommen, um zu bleiben. It means like I came to stay, and it's like a saying, gekommen, um zu bleiben. And we're different. We want to have a different experience. So I'm saying all this to say that, yeah, you've got this loads of people who are experiencing displacement, aren't totally integrated, don't speak the language, and they just kind of get siphoned into this like startup industrial complex.
Mm.
Um, and startups kind of run their companies fast and loose,
Mm.
and it's obviously um, like income and profit driven. I mean, they've got like loads of capital coming through startups, but they try to dress it up. There's this kind of startup vibe of like, this is a nice place to work, or like we give you these benefits, which make it like it's not really like going to work. It's like we're
Mm.
like, and they use language like team, or it's not a company, it's an organization, or we're using governance models that are self-managed. And we've got like all of these like codified ways of being self-managed, which at the end of the day ultimately just amount to you're doing more work and having to take all the responsibility and don't get any resources or support. Oh yeah, and by the way, we don't have an HR department because HR is an outdated concept.
Mm.
And like we're a cool company and we all just get along and we're all such a team, so we don't need HR,
Mhm.
right?
Right. We
Yeah,
have someone
so
who's the head of people, and
people,
we just are going to have a
yeah,
vibe. And
yeah,
yeah, we're a
mhm,
family.
yeah, yeah. And so there's a lot of this in Berlin. Um, and so I have been working at an arts university here. It's private. And it is like based in the UK and uses the UK's mod like this neoliberal conception of the academy. And so it's basically a franchise that's been repackaged and is here in Berlin. And I'm not going to say what university, because I'm being very careful here.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, so I came in as a counselor for the students, a psychological counselor for the students, and in order to basically make a proper living at the organization, I realized actually I need to go full time. And that means I'm going to take on responsibilities in the quote people circle.
Mm.
And and then that sort of snowballed until actually I was ultimately replaced as the counselor for the students, so that I could take on the lead link role, so it's called. So like in self-management, it's like, there's all this lingo to like talk about
Right.
who you talk to and why and how people are connected, and there's a whole graphic, to like organize the self-managed system. And so the lead link is like what I was called, of the people circle. And just had a tremendous amount of work foisted on my shoulders suddenly, that like wasn't being done, which is sort of like, we are now an organization of 120 employees. We need an HR department.
Mhm.
We can't just like have vibes. Like no, like there's German law that we are like horrendously violating.
Mm.
And like there's health and safety regulations that we're horrendously violating. Like just like
Mhm.
wantonly and unapologetically violating. And also, oh, by the way, you want me to do DEI work because at the end of the day, you want a DEI impact assessment. But every time I take any step toward doing anything that's remotely about equity, I'm being met with not only resistance, rage and pounding on tables, and yeah, telling me that I'm, basically totally off track and off the mark, and also being told that, what I know because of the circles I move in, which are radical and mobilized and in touch with what's actually happening on the ground. Not perfect, of course, but I actually know that like I'm an edge walker, and but I'm being told actually that like my ways of doing DEI work in this organization are outdated. This was always the line, was every time something came along that they didn't like, it was outdated, and we're trying to do something new and radical and
Mhm.
exciting, and basically trying to repackage everything to
Right.
suit their ends.
And like
And
we are beyond that now. It's
we're
like
beyond it.
post-feminism or
Yeah.
post, yeah, yeah,
Post-race, I was
post-race.
literally
Yeah.
told that racism is an American problem. I'm bringing in an
Oh,
American problem,
oh,
and it's actually not a problem that we have here in Europe.
oh.
Told this by a white British man. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, interesting. Okay, let's just proceed as though that's true. Where did America get the idea?
Right.
What?
Wow.
Yeah, so we're post everything and we've moved beyond it. And yeah, exactly. And so what ultimately ended up happening was, I, as the lead link of the people circles, okay, obviously I'm not going to be able to use anything that even smacks of traditional measures for taking care of my people. Um, I'm actually going to have to like do the vibey thing, which means checking in. I'm gonna have to like check in with people, build relationships. That's fine. That's actually also really important. HR can also be really shitty,
Mhm.
and litigious, and like really not a fun thing. But yeah, so I basically started to really, in a very like rhizomatic way, like really sending up my tendrils and kind of like, um, without being too invasive, really getting to know like what, like I need to get my finger on the pulse of what's actually happening in this organization. Like what is the quality of work that people are doing? And I realized actually I need to collate this into some sort of report. I'm going to anonymize the information I'm getting, but I need to write a report on this because we are underpaid, we are under-resourced, and people are burning out. We have like all of the signs. So I'm doing psychological safety assessments. I'm doing impromptu, but also getting good data from people around like, not only their mental health, but their physical health and how it's
Mhm.
deteriorating. And we are dangerously on the edge of having like systemic burnout in the organization.
Mhm.
And this is actually like this isn't just about people at this point. I actually feel obligated to the organization from like a financial, like this is going to
Mm.
become a situation. We
Yeah,
have
it's
to take care of our
unviable.
people. It's unviable.
Mm.
So I submitted this report to the owner of the organization. And a week later, I was removed from my role unilaterally without a discussion, and sent back to my original role as the psychological counselor of the students. And
That sounds like demotion, except of course there's no hierarchy, so we can't call
right.
it that.
Yes,
But
exactly. We're
sure.
self-managed, right? We're
Yeah.
self-managed, and there's
Mhm.
that's I wasn't actually demoted, whatever.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, I was removed from my role. And this created a ripple effect for like some really key players who had been already kind of more on the less on the admin side of the university and more on the academic side of the university, already doing some of the like grassroots movement toward creating something that's called a works council. So that's something I should also mention is in the European Union, but it's very, very strong in Germany. It's actually, I'm pretty sure, where the works council originally came from and then was adopted Europe-wide. Is it's baked into the once you adopt a works council, it is baked into the DNA of the organization that the workers have a voice in terms of governance, in terms of code determination, and in terms of negotiation of contract terms, etc. So the idea of unionizing in Germany is, yes, there are unions. There are the state-recognized unions, which are Germany-wide, and you can join them based on which industry you're in. And so for me in the education field, I'm from GEW. It's for research and education, but all kinds of education, so from like grade school all the way to universities. Um, and so definitely when you're creating a works council, you really want to have the support of your union because
Mm.
they're going to help you push back. They're going to help you make sure you do everything on the up and up, because the laws are very specific about how you establish one. You get Rechtsschutzversicherung. How do you say this in English? Wait a second, I need to translate it. Insurance that protects you from being sued.
Right.
Basically. Um, and you get this through your union. It's part of your dues. So like, if you get a threatening letter from your employer and you need to send it to a lawyer in order to respond properly, it's paid for, or if your
Mm.
employer retaliates, which they are not legally allowed to do, you have this insurance that's baked in through the union. But works councils and unions are not the same thing.
Mm.
So unionized people are more protected to go and fight the good fight against employers that aren't doing the thing, which is to take care of their employees. Um, and so basically there were five of us that were part of the union. And they approached me after I had been ousted, and
Mm.
it was done in a very public and humiliating way. It was this really
Mm.
like really horrendous institutional betrayal
Mm.
um, that happened. And I was approached as like, this is not okay, what has happened. I don't actually know what was discussed behind closed doors, but no one should ever be treated this way.
Mm.
And we want to let you in on the little secret, which
Mhm.
is that we have been talking with our union about creating a works council. And so I poured everything into that at that point. And I read the Works Council law front and back in German and English. So like German so that I would get all the nuances of it, and then English so I could explain it to other colleagues. And I took a training in how to do it correctly, because if you miss even one step, your employer can put the kibosh on it. And
Mm.
we made sure, and this took about 6 months of
Mm.
just the learning piece of like making sure we understood the law, making sure we had all of our ducks in a row,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
constantly talking with lawyers and union reps and all of this, but also overlapping that was another 6 month period. So the whole thing took about 9 months.
Mm.
So like with a 3 month overlap, another 6 months was also the grassroots work of connecting with people getting to know, like kind of doing what I was doing when I made this report, that really trying to meet people where they were and understand, like, what is your work? Why is it untenable? Could we actually make it better for you? Um, and if we were to take a step to make it better for you, which is this thing, by the way, do you know that actually it's like a right that you have as a worker in Germany to establish a works council? And
Mm,
what would that look like for us to have representation in the organization that ends up becoming baked into the DNA of the organization?
mm-hmm,
Um, and we created a spreadsheet and just basically hit the bricks and was like, we're going to talk to everyone that we can, get on the same page, find out what the fears are, what are the doubts, what are the biases around that sort of thing. Are people afraid of unions? What kind of weird ideas do people have about these sort of actions?
mm-hmm,
And just really start to bit by bit, week by week, titrate people up, to the ability to have these difficult conversations. Even just, I think a lot of people don't even know that they're grieving the fact that they're overworked and like not being
mm-hmm,
appreciated, that they're enraged, that they're underpaid. Like we have a
mm-hmm,
really like a lot of trouble even accessing those emotions because they're so filled with shame.
mm-hmm,
Also because the organization is doing this like startup-y bullshit, which is like putting so much emphasis on individual responsibility, that it's, personal failing. If
mm-hmm,
you because of the logic of these systems, right? It ends up
mm-hmm,
becoming this personal failing if you're overworked. And it's like,
mm-hmm,
there's so much to unpack because what we were dealing the spreadsheet that we made ended up I only want to mention this quickly because we gamified it basically because we realized we are in a disorganized attachment field, or I realized, I don't know if the other four
mm-hmm,
did. This is what I'm tracking. This is a disorganized attachment field and people don't know which end is up. And that is very, very deliberate, in terms of how things have unfolded in this organization, to keep people off balance. This is cult tactics. The owner of the organization is like deeply involved in a well-known cult and
mm-hmm.
reproduces those cult dynamics in the organization. Um, and so we realized actually to make any sense of this, we actually kind of have to poke fun at it. And we made a spreadsheet of using the Dungeons and Dragons affiliations. So to find out which people we could talk to, basically. So the low hanging fruit, where because do you know like Dungeons and Dragons,
I don't remember very
like,
much about Touch It.
yeah. So it's like loyal, neutral, and chaotic, and
Uh-huh.
then good, neutral, and evil. And
Mm-hmm.
then those combine. Yes, it's I would say for people listening, because I did it with my hands. There's an X and a Y axis. Um,
So
and
you'd be like,
so
that person's chaotic neutral. We might be able
chaotic
to
neutral.
harness them into our, because they kind of are okay with stirring shit up. And I
Yeah,
bet we could get them to like be on our side, though maybe not super reliable.
yeah.
Were you getting it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, so like the loyal good, you definitely want that person on your team for like fighting the good fight and taking the helm, and that they're going to be the knight in shining armor kind of vibe. Whereas like
Mhm.
you needed more of a me at the same time, which is like the chaotic good, which is
Right.
like I'm gonna fuck up your shit and I'm gonna like do it because I love you.
Right.
And I'm gonna fly by night. And yeah, yeah. So anyway, so we took this list and basically assigned people, like what their Dungeons and Dragons affiliation would be to kind of organize how we wanted to. But what I realized we were doing was we were tuning to people. That was our way, as a group of saying like, what is the nervous system state of this person right now? And what
Hmm.
are their strategies for dealing with a disorganized attachment field? Um,
Hmm.
and that's not how we were talking about it as a group. But for me, in my like facilitator mental health mind, I was just like, we are presencing secure attachment by even just making this because we're tuning to
Hmm.
people,
Hmm.
and really figuring out how they land within this really messed up situation.
Totally.
Yeah.
So when we think of grassroots organizing, there's often kind of this notion of David and Goliath in mind. Like, we feel, like you said, there's this like hyper individualization, the atomizing of individuals, personal responsibility, the valorization of being able to withstand whatever workloads, burdens, whatever it is. So we feel small. The power structure feels big. It feels monolithic. And when we're in a down power position, one of the things we can do is collectivize, which is great. We gain more power in that way. But that is also a ton of work. Like what you're describing, that is a ton of attunement. That's a ton of contact nutrition. It's a ton of tracking. There's also so much difference. We're trying to connect across difference, and that's just inherently agitating, right? Like people in up power positions rarely identify with the power they hold, and instead often identify with their more marginalized identities or identify with their oppression. So that's like a lot of work to be able to track your own, how much like actual personal or inherent or contextual power do I have? How can I harness that? But also tracking what's happening in the field. And sometimes we have to overlook pain points temporarily, let's say, at our intersections. The way I describe this when I'm like teaching facilitation lately is like try to think about intersections as roundabouts instead of four-way stops. Like they're just not that clear ever. It's always much more, let's stay fluid and who's in what lane. Are there lanes? Like, how are we going to work together? And there's a phrase, I think it's a pretty classic anarchist phrase, right? Like, no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. So here we're in this disorganized attachment field. We aren't exactly sure who we can trust, who we can rely on. It's really hard to know what's reasonable, what's unreasonable, etc. So once you kind of had a sense of like, these are the people we're attuning to, and we're going to gather them in and try to like harness them, gather them towards this pro-social collective behavior. What were some of the challenges you faced in galvanizing a large number of people? Because there's so much fear. There's so much fear in the field. Like, if I do that, I'm going to be a target. Or what if we fail? What if we? So once you had this sense of, okay, we might have this critical mass, what was challenging at that point?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, there were multiple steps in the process of being able to get to the position where I could be. I love like this expression you use, which is like the amygdala cooler. You know, it's like when
Yeah.
there's like hypervigilance in the field, and like actually sometimes some people just need like someone to coo to their amygdala and say like, you have hypervigilance because you're not being accompanied. Um, and we're creating this thing over here, which is going to allow you to be witnessed and accompanied, and you don't have to do this alone.
Mhm.
Um, but to even get to the point where I could do the amygdala cooing, um, was, yeah, like definitely becoming a member of my union and getting the backing of that. Actually being fucked over enough. Is it, so do we need to edit
Yeah,
that?
we can
Is
swear.
it?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, we don't have to edit. Yeah.
Like to where it was sort of like, actually, I really no longer have any sort of sense of I owe the owner anything, or
Mhm.
like there's no sense of like, actually, if there was retaliation, which is illegal, but employers find ways. And honestly, if I lost this job, I'd be actually happy about it.
Right.
And there had to be enough things for me to sort of feel like, I don't have so much to lose, or the stakes are low enough for me. I have lowered the stakes and they've been lowered for me in some ways, um, that I now get to make a choice. I feel this a lot in my life in many different ways, in different capacities. This idea when like, basically, when nothing is expected of you, because either you've had an experience of institutional betrayal or you hold oppressed identities or whatever it is, it's kind of a great place to be. Not always. Yeah, this is coming out not quite right. it's a great place to be in that. People not expecting things of you means that you kind of surprise people. Um,
Mm,
and you can like slip through the cracks. And that's what I meant when I said like the organizing had to be really rhizomatic. Um,
mm,
like kind of going chthonic and then
mm.
popping through the cracks
Right.
in the
Going
system
into the
and leaving.
underworld and then surfacing in surprising
Yeah,
places.
yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. And the element of surprise was also very helpful. Um, and so something really critical that happened that kind of backfired because the owner ended up dissolving the self-managed constitution, which had been the like primary document holding the whole thing together, dismissed two primary, like one of the longest standing people in leadership positions and gave them gag orders and had them like force them out of the organization. Um, and this was right on the heels of everything that had happened with me. You know, this was 2 months later that they were dismissed from the organization. And this was a huge like collapse moment for the organization that I think the owner, I honestly don't actually think that he's nefarious. But I do think he does things intentionally. And I do think there was sort of like some scare tactic involved
Mm.
in this. Um, and it backfired
Wait, so not
because, yeah,
hostile, but like I'm willing to blow it up. Just you know, that kind of thing. Like I'm willing to burn the boats here. So not necessarily personally hostile, but just like, oh yeah, watch me tear up this document. Am I getting that? Is that what you
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, because there was a resistance from me and a couple of people had left the organization. And part of the reason I got put into my position was because people had left. And then with the dismissal of these two people in leadership positions, it was sort of like kind of a power move, not kind of a power, complete and total power move, intended to sort of scare people because it was this primary document holding the whole thing together. And suddenly, two people who were at the helm of the ship and this foundational document are gone. But what he didn't know is we had already been for 3 months connecting with people and organizing them and mobilizing them. And the ones who weren't able to mobilize because they were in freeze or hypervigilance, you know, really like doing the caretaking. Um, and so what ended up happening was enough people feeling resourced and feeling like enough is enough, that we didn't actually have to mobilize people. It just happened. There was
Ooh, that sounds nice.
yeah, there was a response, a letter, you know, basically people self-organized a meeting, wrote an open letter to the owner. Um, and then it was right on the heels of that open letter coming out 3 days later that the committee that was making sure that we were going to have a works council announced, hey, by the way, we're gonna start the creation of a works council.
So
And
can you
so
tell us also more some of the like core components of this? Like there was like, okay, here comes the Works Council, but it sounds like you had some plans in the works. So like tell us even more about like the core components of the strategy. Because okay, that happened. That's like a little bit of a surprise, but people were mobilized and then you had a strategy. Lay that out, the core components of your strategy.
yeah, so the main thing was realizing, so because so many people were in hypervigilance, that we actually needed to like make sure that the collective nervous system was like really feeling pro-social and really feeling well connected. That was step one in the strategy. Step two was to make sure that we we're a small enough company and that we were actually able to use a loophole in the law, which allowed us to like couple things together. So basically, the moment you announce that you're going to create a works council, you're legally required to have an informational meeting for all contracted employees. And they can attend, they don't have to attend, but if you are in the committee that's wanting to create a works council, you have to create an informational meeting. Um, and we actually found a loophole which allowed us to do the informational meeting and the election of candidates at the same time. So we expedited things. That was one main thing, was like while people are mobilized to ride this wave.
Mm.
Um, and then within 2 weeks, you can have an election for the people who will sit on the Works Council. And you have to have at least 50% of contracted employees vote in order to demonstrate that you have enough support to create a Works Council. So then basically we made sure that we got people to this meeting, which was, after like 3 months of the five of us putting our tendrils out and connecting with people and really sort of fluffing up the social
I
nervous
like it.
system.
Nice.
Yeah. And so by the time they got to the room, there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of apprehension. There was, I was trying to make eye contact with people, trying to note who can't make eye contact right now. For those who did make eye contact, I was making sure that I had kind eyes on. It's like all of the contact nutrition was there, and even so I was co-facilitating with someone, and just making sure that, you know, I was using vocal prosody as well to meet and match people. And I'm realizing actually the way I learned about vocal prosody when I was beginning to facilitate was like, it's just the sing-songy quality of my voice. And like, I'm just going to have this like melodious voice all the time. And that's
Mhm.
vocal prosody and that's contact
Yeah.
nutrition. No, but
Therapy voice or
yeah, therapy
facilitator
voice.
voice.
Yeah. Yeah. But actually, like part of vocal prosody that I'm coming to find as a facilitator is meeting and matching the person, where it's like,
Totally.
yeah, you're angry, and I hear that you're angry. And can you hear that in my voice, I'm angry for you? And I get
Hmm.
you. And that's also vocal prosody, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Totally.
yeah, yeah. And so there's a lot of that, just like tracking collective nervous system in the room and meeting and matching and then helping to like settle.
Hmm.
That was a really big part of the group experience. So there's the one-on-one, the sort of like grassroots, get them in a corner, get them over a cup of coffee, or we're all going to go out for a drink afterwards. And so a small group will talk about it, and but then once we were all together, it was really this like I was just bringing out the contact nutrition. Like you talk about the five components of contact
Yeah.
nutrition.
Kind eyes, vocal prosody, safe touch, shared rhythm, ingestion behaviors like eating and drinking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, the how of secure attachment and a
Yeah.
secure based facilitation style. It's like it all sounds great. Kindergarten voice sounds great for some people, super grating for others. So,
Yeah.
no, that's not what we're doing. We're like meeting, matching,
Yeah.
resonating with these 5 different forms of contact nutrition, which are the building blocks of secure attachment. Love it.
Exactly. And so, yeah, kind eyes, vocal prosody. We had the other three people who were involved in our committee who weren't facilitating, prepared food.
Nice.
Somebody brought beverages. So we also had ingestion behaviors on. The quality of the collective nervous system after we all ate together was like we were laughing and it was this like great team building experience. Yeah, so these are the building blocks of secure attachment, 100%. And there were still people in the room, even after getting kind eyes and the vocal prosody and the eating, the ingestion behaviors. Um, and of course, it's the workplace, so we're not really touching each other very much, but and also shared rhythm, like kind of like noticing when, somebody's upset, putting my hand over my chest, just sort of acknowledge like, okay, yeah, so I'm sharing, I'm in that rhythm with you, or, even just like taking a somatic reset break, it's a 5-hour meeting, and we're not going to power through. We're actually, let's
Hmm.
let's take a break, and like, let's all get
Hmm.
up and move around. Um, and yet, even with all of that still online, there are some folks who are navigating a disorganized attachment field who themselves are maybe going through a life blip or have a really dysregulated or disorganized attachment system, who are going to see signs of secure attachment as a threat.
Hmm.
And maybe even will erupt or react or find it actually like distrusting that like why are you attuning to me? What do you want from
Hmm.
me? Or you're attuning to me and that feels uncomfortable, and
Yeah, it's a
there's
manipulation, right? Safety
yeah,
is the trigger where this is so outside my norm. I don't actually know what safeness would feel like, but this feels bad. So this cannot be, it's so unusual. It feels bad
yeah,
because, of course, the unknown is like the greatest threat that
Yeah.
any mammal can have. So that does make sense. That's a hard one.
Yeah. So rather than like continue with those folks after the meeting, we were successful in terms of being able to get to the election phase. Oh, and by the way, I'll just give away the end now, which is we had 85% of contracted employees vote for the Works Council. It passed
Huzzah!
with flying colors.
Love it.
And yeah. But to get to before that, so the 2 weeks in between this informational meeting and the actual election, where it was like, okay, well, we sense that we're probably going to get this ball over the net, but we really do have to push at this point because there were enough people in the room who were exhibiting this sort of like disorganized kind of attachment, and that's where I kicked into like high gear as like guerrilla facilitator, and it's really like I'm. No amount of dosing the field with secure attachment is actually what's going to help you. I mean, I'm going to try to meet you where you are. I'm going to try to address concerns. Um, and I'm actually not going to like go directly for what's going on. I'm going to down tools. We're going to have a cup of coffee and we're going to like hold that cup of coffee and we're going to talk about what's going on in your life. And like, I heard that your kid was really sick 2 weeks ago and you were out for a week. And I imagine you're feeling really overwhelmed with your kid because I know you're also a single parent. Let's talk about that instead of talking about what's going on at the workplace. And oh, oops, actually, okay, that's really activating. I'm noticing signs of distress, and I'll reflect it back to that person. Oh, by the way, this seems really actually like a distressing topic. Let's talk about something else. How's your coffee? Can I get you another one? And just really like that's also the amygdala cooing coming in, where it's like down
Mm-hmm.
tools, simple connection,
Mm-hmm.
just connect with the person.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're going to see signs of secure attachment or signs of, it's not even, taking it outside of the like attachment model, just in terms of, stress models, if a group is mobilized and somebody's still in a high state of freeze, they're maybe even like in total immobility,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the group is mobilizing, that can be terrifying. And actually
Totally.
it can make a much more protracted freeze experience for that person.
Totally. Feels like
Yeah.
pressure, feels like inadequacy, feels like abandonment, being left behind, very
Yeah.
vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Abandonment
So
being
the
the main
whole
one
like,
coming up.
hey, what what can we do? What will it take for you to come along with us? Even in whatever is the most, do you want us to make sure we're just sending you the emails? Do you want us to, actually, do you want to be on sabbatical for a little bit? Do you want us to, like, yeah, what would it take for you to come along, kind of like gather you into this pro-social movement so that you don't feel abandoned, but also not put pressure on you to mobilize if you are just not there yet,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
we can just carry you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and a lot of the fear that was coming, so it's the fear of abandonment for sure. It's abandonment wound that so many people have. There's also the fear of being seen, actually having to show up on election day and be seen. That was the thing that came up over and over again with people at oppression. It's like, well, let's modify this then. You can mail in your ballot.
Mhm.
Nobody has to see that you went in. Nobody can retaliate against you because they didn't, it's
Mhm.
and so this fear of being seen, or this fear of I'm gonna have to show up and there will be consequences for my having shown up.
Yeah,
Um, I was like, well, let's just modify that. Fill in your
totally.
ballot. We'll
And
take
that's
care of
just
the
like an
rest.
access need, right? Like
Yeah.
how can we encourage you to center your needs such that you can be present for the relational parts but not have to in the like instrumental parts. In other words, like, oh, that actually feels like a huge barrier to participation. That's just administrative setup. We can just totally like that is not hard. And though, if you can, we would actually really value your input on this. Like, would it be better as a one-on-one coffee? Do you want to come to the big meeting, or is that too much? Do you want to just have a Zoom with me? Because we do want to hear you. We do want to connect with you. Like that piece is good, but we can work within your capacity, right? And like you don't have to stretch for like fucking executive functioning. Like, let's not waste our energy on that. We can totally modify that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Especially because what an organization like this, a company like this has been preying on for so long is like exhausting people's executive functioning. So they actually can't make clear decisions. So they are totally unmanaged and totally dysregulated. And that's how it's been designed.
totally.
Yeah.
So Nicholas Walter was a well-known anarchist who said freedom without equality means that the poor and weak are less free than the rich and strong. And equality without freedom simply means that we are all slaves together. So this whole, like, what you described as like, oh, there's a flat organization, and yet you are absolutely being exploited and you are too exhausted to help yourself get free, right? So in practical terms, what did you achieve in worker gains with your work caucus, or however it's conceived of now? Basically what in North America we call with your union. What did you achieve in this collectivizing? And also, it's still very much limited by operating within capitalism, right? So that's like always a tricky thing. Like, how can a union achieve more freedom and equality, given that it's happening inside a system that we're all trying to disassemble, all of us who are radical anti-capitalist? So I do want to focus on some of your gains, and I'm also interested to hear, like some of the limitations, like the realistic, the realism of this is what a union can do. And also, unions can become problems when they also have to, deal with hierarchy and rank and, calcification around power and that kind of thing. Just
Yeah.
riff for me, Mishka. Tell us what was good.
Yeah, well, I would say just like from the big picture, yes, Germany is a capitalist country, like all European countries. It is also a social market. So things are much more regulated, and workers' rights are much more robust here, than, for example, in the United States. And so we were definitely dealing with conditions that were conducive to this being a very positive experience for people. It's already, I mean, there's even a law that's it's written into basic law in Germany, this idea that you can have a works council. Um, and so the main things that we achieved through implementing and installing this, the works council, or installing a union within the organization, um, was co-determination. That basically any major decisions that will get made that would, so the owner decides to do something, he passes it by his board of directors. The board of directors would then pass that on to the works council, and the works council can decide whether or not this project goes through or this budget change goes through, or also collective bargaining for contract terms and working conditions, negotiating with local agencies for health and safety regulations that are being violated. That goes through the Works Council rather than an individual having to report something or call something out or move something forward, and training. So actual professional development is something that is guaranteed through the Works Council. So what kind of budget you end up getting out of your company is always in question, but that there does have to be an approved budget for professional development, and that this is regulated through the Works Council. So those are the main things that you get when you unionize in Europe, specifically in Germany. And in terms of the power dynamics and the rank stuff, especially dealing with hierarchies, so one of the ways that does get leveled a little bit is there is what's called the Frauenquote, so that there has to be a minimum amount of women, or minority gender. They have changed, finally, they changed it this year. Whatever the minority gender is in the organization, that there has to be a quota of that. So it can't just be a bunch of like fools. So like we have ousted this like shitty white dude. And we just installed 5 shitty white dudes. No, sorry, like, yeah, there's tons of like amazing. I'm actually really happy with the Works Council that was elected. Actually, like the people that were elected are just really, really smart and sweet and amazing humans, and 3 of them are white men.
Lovely white
Dude,
men.
yes,
Yes,
yes.
of which
Who
there are
are,
many, of which there are plenty. We're just also
yeah,
acknowledging that
also
there's a lot of, yeah, a
acknowledging.
lot of shitty white men in power. And
Yeah,
that's just observation,
it's
friends.
just, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We're not hating on men on the Numinous
No,
podcast. We love
no, we
men.
love men. We have men come on. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, And yeah, it's yet to be seen, actually, how power conscious the Works Council will be at this particular company. Um, the idea is that they'll work with the organization, they'll work with leadership, and that they'll work with the owner. And that it doesn't have to be this oppositional experience, that there can actually be a really nice collaborative. The main thing that you really get from a works council is this is having a much more trauma-informed work environment
Mm,
where like we're centering voice and choice and we're centering
mm,
collaboration. And that is much more guaranteed when you install that. Or it's guaranteed that there will be the framework for that. Um, yeah, and in terms of, and things can go more slowly, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Actually, some things do need to go more slowly, like contract negotiations should take time.
mhm,
This is a big deal, especially because it's very, very hard to get fired in Germany. And contract terms need to be really specific. And that benefits the company ultimately when you take the time to actually go through the process and do that.
mhm.
Um, yeah, all of the things that I've named are basically just trying to make like something that is inherently oppressive more livable. It's
Right.
not the solution. It's not a magic bullet. It's not like, it's just to make sure that there's a little bit more agency,
Yeah.
um, and that there's much more choice, involved for the people doing the actual work in the organization. The reality is the overculture is still capitalism, and it's still this
Mhm,
like neoliberal racist form of capitalism that we're all just like muddying through.
mhm,
That hasn't changed.
mhm,
But our ability to like leverage and make choices within that is much, much more improved. And
mhm.
that's the main
There's
thing.
this catchphrase I heard years ago that's really stayed with me. Around it, it's just heal the activist, activate the healer. Because everything you've been describing is like we need both, right? We need to be mobilized, but we also need those people that can like slow us down. And uh, activism is just, it seems like it's inherently exhausting. Maybe it isn't, but, and also we need to activate the healers. One of the things we've seen in the last 6, 7 years, it's going on a long time now, 10 years, let's say, is that neoliberal, um, acquisitive, consuming kind of, uh, let's call it white lady spirituality, right? Where it's like we are we are constantly absorbed in our own healing. It can become like a form of narcissistic interlude where we're just constantly needing to heal ourselves instead of like casting our awareness a little wider and activating for that pro-social collective change, right? Like I think we've had enough time trying to heal ourselves. It's like it only happens in connection and it only happens inside these ecosystems. Um, so I think activism and healing do go hand in hand. Um, and it's partly also because of the trauma stewardship, right? Like you described, like movement work is exhausting because we are continually exposed to the trauma of oppression. We are working with people who are being exploited. We are trying to gather ourselves in and collect and direct our energies, but people are going through it, right? And so there's this spectrum of engagement needed. We need warriors, we need healers, we need agitators, we need space holders. We need people who can be very bold and vocal. We need people who are deep listeners. And there's definitely a place for everyone in the movement. And we also, I think, have to appreciate we can't always be working at the highest level of generativity and output, even though it's very urgent, right? Bayo Akamalafe says it all the time. The times are urgent, let us slow down. We need fallow times, we need rest times, we need recovery. So in the wake of all of this that you went through and you are going through, how have you tended your own trauma and your own recovery in the wake of this really great, sustained effort?
Mm. Yeah, so as you were describing the ecosystem, I was thinking about, there's definitely aspects that, so I'm bringing into the ecosystem in terms of like we were talking about contact nutrition, and there's a lot of output, as you were saying, and also knowing my own limits and knowing when it's like, okay, actually, um, I'm about to go through something really hard. I'm just gonna like shamelessly plug the Numinous Network. I'm gonna log into the Numinous Network and put like every like spot that fits into my calendar, make sure I am getting my own contact nutrition. And that I'm getting this really like positive nourishment for myself and really feeling connected to something greater than myself. So it's this like network of people that are all over the world, and then I get to just drop into, and I actually don't have to be holding space. Um, and so that was really important in terms of like creating my own ecosystem of care. Um, and ecosystem for me also includes relationship with the unseen. And I think for me, that's a real shift in the conversation from the like concrete or like more on the ground skills that you need for the community organizing and the labor organizing, and really getting into the meta skills of organizing. And for me, the astromagic was actually very, very helpful, propitiating the gods and goddesses, propitiating the unseen, if you will, if those words aren't words you like. Um, and I really anchored it inspired by you as well, anchored it in the days of the week.
Mm.
And so there's, each day of the week is associated with deities in the Greek pantheon or the Roman pantheon as well. And for me, propitiation mostly just looked like reading the Orphic hymn for each day. So on the moon, the Orphic hymn, or on Monday, the Orphic hymn to the moon, Tuesday, the Orphic hymn to Mars, etc., on and on, throughout the week. And also just sort of dropping into like, what are the qualities of this entity that was worshipped for thousands of years? And can I sort of tap into that energy today? Or also the planetary hours throughout the day, so like 3 times a day, I could actually drop into the quality of a planet. And kind of going back to this idea of white lady spirituality, I was guilty of going to my natal chart, like while this was going on, and like looking at my natal chart and being like, so what were the planets doing, and how can I leverage this and that, and how can I like, basically, how can I optimize myself in order to like have enough grit to get through this experience? And it was this
Why
like,
is that a guilt thing? That's how I live my
yeah.
life. What are you trying to say?
I mean, what I'm trying to say is that like I went to it as a way of like um navel gazing, actually, a little bit.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Yes, I need to have everything right in place. We can
Yeah,
develop also a bit of superstition then. Hey, like, oh no,
yeah,
I didn't send the email at the right time and now it's going to be fucked or whatever.
exactly.
It's like,
Yeah,
I can't make a move
yeah,
because the moon was void, of course. I get that. Yeah, we
yeah,
can get a
yeah,
little bit hyperfixated on everything needing to be just right. And like, yeah.
yeah. And so when I noticed that that's what I was doing, was like, oh, this feels superstitious and actually not something that is actually helping me or resourcing me. I took a step back and thought again, okay, actually, so remembering that what I'm doing is collectivizing, and I'm in a very activated field. Um, And I need to be able to take this one step at a time, and actually retreating into some sort of navel gazing experience with this is not going to be helpful for anyone.
Mm.
So that really brought me to, because this is a very conflictual experience, right? So battling things out with the company, but also trying to do repair work. So there's this like very martial quality, this like Mars energy that's happening on like the overarching. But then there's also this very Venusian quality of what's happening.
Mhm.
And so I looked to my chart, and both of those planets happen to be in detriment. Um,
Oh.
yeah. And then I was thinking, oh, but they're swapped. Like where they're like supposed to be in terms of their like astromagic potency, they're swapped. And so I started contemplating, like not really thinking about me or how that means that like I am in detriment in some way, but actually
Right.
just like how does that actually then manifest, for example, because I actually decided to stick with the Venusian theme, which is so in the flower realm, in the plant realm, I
Mm.
really like for me, flowers are very Venusian, and thinking, okay, well, but what flowers are associated with Mars?
Mm.
And hellebore is associated with Mars. And so I started actually just sort of dropping into the consciousness of hellebore and really trying to access that a bit. And that completely changed my relationship with how I was showing up in the ecosystem you were describing. I
Mm.
was really feeling like, I actually suddenly a, a, an entity and a planet that I feel really alienated from, or even maybe afraid of. You know, even the Orphics were afraid. More like the hymn is like actually all about like, whoa, slow your roll, Mars. It's like
Right.
chill out and yield, please. Is it felt accessible suddenly.
Mm.
And it felt like so the main thing that I was contemplating was this is a flower that blooms on the darkest day of the year, like
Mm.
beyond all reason and in conditions that are not conducive to blooming at all. This
Mm.
flower blooms. Um, and by the way, it's not heliotropic, it blooms facing down. It like blooms like holding vigil for Persephone, for the or
Mm.
whatever is happening in the chthonic realms.
Mm.
Um, and so then when I was contemplating that, you know, really actually like almost like meditating on this hellebore blooming in the darkest day of the year, pointing its petals down, holding vigil for Persephone. I was
Mm.
thinking like, so a metaphor that we often use for the heart is flowers. This shows up in most cultures. It's like
Mm.
the heart is a flower. And the hellebore doesn't show its petals. You have to get down on its level. You have to level the power differential
Mhm.
or elevate the flower in order
Mhm.
to see it. But in any case, in order to be in relationship with hellebore, you have to level and become
Mm.
on eye level with hellebore. That felt really important.
Mm.
And it shows the backside of its heart. It doesn't show the front of its heart. And so I really like sunk into that. And that's when it came back to me. And I had this somatic experience of
Mm.
this is how I could show up. I could
Mm.
actually, I'm not going to be the person I'm not the loyal good. That's not me. I'm not the knight in shining armor. I'm not this like, um, that's not how I show up. I show up by, I sit back and actually I'm gonna contemplate the backside of my heart and rest in that and presence that and see if that starts to shift the ecosystem and
Mm.
just bring that consciousness in. And so for me, that was the magic making was what if I showed up differently
Mm.
um, based on having this relationship with the other than human. Um,
Mm.
and I'm wondering what you're thinking about that actually, because this is something that you have practice in, and you have a very devotional practice in terms of astromagic, and um, I feel very novice. I think I described it in a way that feels like it feels really embodied, and that's why I think I was able to describe it in the way I was. But I feel very like novice to like actually to you as an inspiration, and I'm wondering if you could say
Oh,
more
thank
about.
you. Well, I think you totally nailed it. You have it like it's so much about relationship with these planets. It's so much about relationship with the mythology, our personal myth work around it. And so I think orienting to what would relationship with, say, Mars be like, is kind of just, that's like the first step. And so then once you're in relationship, then you can actually ask, like, okay, Mars, so I actually need your boost, right? Like, and so of course it's like you want to juice up your friends, you want to be like showing up for them, you want to like, you want to let them know how much you love them, and that then it feels a little better when you're like, hey, could you drive me to the airport? Like I have this like big ask. And like it's secure attachment. It's a very like animist way of proceeding, is to want to be in secure attachment. And so, yeah, I could definitely see I would be working with Mars for sure. And I was born on a Tuesday. Mars rules Tuesday, so I feel affinity, yeah, to that. And making offerings. I have like if if I'm on my own, it's a masturbation practice. If my husband is here, I'm like, hey, do you want to propitiate? And he's usually up for it. I'm like, okay, we're working with Mars. And he's like, yes, praise be to Mars. But like, it's about kind of raw passion. It's physical. So there's like lots of different ways that I'll propitiate Mars. And then I feel pretty strong being like, okay, I need your sword now. Like, I need you to give me strength. I'm going to be more bold. you know that's like, I bring my Mars is also in detriment, so is my Venus. So those are days that I particularly work with. And yeah, if I'm collectivizing and I'm working with power, Venus of course is also very much associated with justice. And so there's the union of it, the beauty, the love, the attunement that you were bringing to your community organizing is so perfect. I'm sure Venus was like, oh, Mishka, my blessed child, like happy to bestow you with grace and blessings and mercy. And also, we're not dicking around here, not dicking around. We're like, we want justice. And so there's like an organizing energy around that we know what we really care about. And these are our principles. And this is how we're going to take care of our people. And that these people are in my care. And I am in the care of Venus. So when I'm like offering, again, beauty, lushness, fiscal diligence, all these things that I know please Venus, she's gonna bless me. That's her jam. That's what she's gonna do. And so it's easy then to channel that Venusian quality to all of the people, in a group. I might also be working with Saturn because I want to play a really long game. I'd be doing stuff on Saturdays. I'd be wearing black, and I'd also be like, Saturn, we want to harvest. I want abundance for all of us, not just the big boss man, And so that's I think a great deity to be working with, because Saturn is like father time. But Saturn does have this like very authoritarian almost, or like patriarchal, sort of paternal, let's call it paternal quality. And so this is a chance to harness the gifts of that, which is benevolent harvest for everyone, not just feeling like a union doesn't have to just be like, boundaries and, conflict and limiting, it's like, no, this is about having a structure so that all may benefit. And we're playing a good long game here. It's making us all more sustainable, the company itself, right? That what you described, that collaborative quality is amazing. I love that. I would definitely work with those. I'd also be working with, I'd work with every single day. You'd obviously
Well,
on Mondays, you'd be like, I need to do the healing. On Wednesdays, I'd be like, yeah, I want to convey this message really clearly, really simply. What do we want? Peace. When do we want it now? Like no justice, no peace. Like we'd have our catchphrases. Yeah, there'd be something I would want to do for every day.
I really enjoyed what you were saying about Saturn, because that also became really prime. It's just really interesting to be doing so much organizing and caretaking and all of these things, and then actually looking to the malefics for support, because Saturn is a timekeeper and puts things in right-sized containers. And there were moments of like, actually, this needs a container because we're dealing with a lot of narcissism, right? And boundary transgressions are just the norm. And actually, so if I'm trying to word an email in a specific way and it's got to be sent to the owner, or it's going to be sent to my lawyer, who's going to send it to the owner, whatever, I'm writing that email on Saturday.
Right.
Also because there's so
Maybe
much
on
like, yeah,
Saturday in the
yeah.
hour of Mercury.
For example,
Let's
yeah,
mix it up.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a perfect example, I think. And then the other aspect of Saturn that's really inspiring to work with for me, and it's also like a bit scary and kind of like I don't quite have my footing with, is this aspect of being the timekeeper. And especially when there's been so much amygdala activation, there's sort of this like, well, it's like stepping out of time, but also stuck in time, at the same
Mm,
time, that happens with like high levels of fear and really like trauma responses, where it's
mhm,
like something that happened in the past is like always now, 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 and it's always urgent,
mhm,
urgent, urgent, right? And the
mhm.
amygdala does this so beautifully to help us survive, and yet it takes us out of time, like real
Yeah,
time.
it doesn't
Yeah,
really
yeah,
stamp things. It's the
yeah,
ever present now. Everything's
yeah.
available in this moment, but it doesn't tell you, oh, but wait, that was then and this is now. And conversely, it doesn't allow us to believe something different is possible. It's always been this way. We can't change it. It'll never be different. We're just like Groundhog Day is like projecting into the future consciously or unconsciously. We have this like learned helplessness that comes from just like, well, it happened in the past. It's always been like this. And yeah, our amygdala isn't necessarily going to help us with that. So we could be like, hey, Saturn, we're playing a long game here. We want a
Yeah.
long narrative arc of transformation. And it's like, oh, that's that great quote, right? The arc of justice is long, but it bends towards, or no, the arc of justice is long, bends towards justice. The arc of
Wait,
time is long, but it bends towards
yeah.
justice. Yeah.
The arc of the moral universe.
The moral universe. That's what it is. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. Yeah, Martin Luther King Jr. Yes. Yeah. So,
Mm.
Mishka, how have you been coping then with the grief and the rage that I would presume would come up? That, you talked about the organizational betrayal, the humiliation. I'm so sorry that happened to you. And then also, I imagine that after some time of being in mobilization, there's some nuance to bring about, like, yeah, what are you still mad about? Is because mobilization and winning some battles collectively can feel good, but you might still carry the personal impacts of bearing the brunt, your tip of the spear when you're organizing like that. And I'm just curious, how are you coping with the grief and the anger and the rage?
Mm. I mean, I think I was hinting at that a little bit with this aspect of going to my natal chart and
Mm,
thinking that it's all about me. Um, and actually what changes that is oh, it's actually not about me. Um, and sort of simultaneously centering myself, which is that like yeah, I get to be in the center of my own life and make choices, and I get to choose how I show up. And one of the ways I chose to show up was this sort of like the contemplation of actually I'm gonna rest and I'm gonna sit back and I'm gonna be the presence that's able to sit back. um, and and that feeling really like a corrective experience as well, because often I think when I experience, especially in the workplace, whenever I've experienced misuses of power, or in this case, actually, just to like quickly just bring in, we don't have to unpack it necessarily, but um, in the system that we were working in, it was often underuse of power, causing
mm,
harm. And Cedar Barstow talks about this quite a bit, is underusing power and that causing harm.
mhm,
But in any case, whenever there's power dynamics and there's misuse of power happening, um, I have often not known how to operate from a down power position, or
mhm,
feeling like I can't take action because I'm in a down power position. Um, and for me, really, really understanding power, rank, and privilege has been like such like it's just the neuroscience of privilege alone, just like learning about that, um, and how power functions and how it's so invisibilized to so many people. And when you see it, you can't unsee it. And then you get to just like feel your feet and feel your seat and like just sit in your power.
mhm,
Grief and rage are so much more. Rage actually has then an anchor and can
mm,
be a mobilizer. And then grief can actually be, rather than something that feels unmanageable, overwhelming, or something that you actually collapse into, is also a part of like lubricating my social body, or actually being able to really drop in and really genuinely connect. And so I think like the main way, I will probably answer this differently in a year, but at the moment it feels really, really potent to say that really figuring out how power functions and why it functions, and still being able to make choices even when you're down power, and recognize that there's always 100% power, and that's personal power. Like that's for me like such a huge revelation. And so yeah, I might be down power, but I always have 100% of my personal power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's potent. Yeah, it's such a helpful thing to when you're really diving into the neurobiology of power, of whiteness, of privilege, and then you start to unpack like, okay, what does it look like to map the power then in the room? It's such a good safeguard for the kind of gaslighting, not to just like use that in a light way, but like the actual like, no, that's not what's really happening kind of thing. It's like, no. Once I know how to map it and I can see it, I can't unsee that, like, no, this is not okay. And, it sounds like in your quote unquote flat organization or like self-managed, you're making it seem like I have so much power. But in fact, I am the, underclass here. I am the worker. You are the one with all the power. And that is so important for us to remember, not only so we can collectivize and gain power. And like the way that you did is such a beautiful example, but also recognize that, like, yeah, if I don't use my personal power, it creates a vacuum. And
Yeah.
in that vacuum where I'm not stepping into my inherent power because only I can notice a name, that it's like, nope, I can't help but notice that I'm still the worker and you're still the boss. I can't help but notice that nope, like I am seeing this correctly. We have the power always to notice and name what our experience is. And like there is an inherent power in like, nope, I know who I am, I know what I care about, I know where I stand in this, potentially messy, difficult to discern nature of our relationship. There are tools that we can use to map that for sure. And once you kind of know how to do that, they can't pull the wool over anymore. It's like a beautiful place to be. So thank you so much for reminding us of that, Mishka. And what's going to be next for you? This is like a surprise. I'm continuing this on for one more question. What's going to be next for you, given all you've learned in this experience?
Well, because I don't have enough collectivity in my life.
Mm.
So what I didn't mention is I live in one of the old school anarchist feminist houses here in Berlin. So my life revolves around collectivism and organizing. And I've joined a feminist healthcare collective as well here in Berlin. And so I'm working collectively with them as well. I'm doing trauma therapy, I'm doing ear acupuncture, and we'll also have ear acupuncture happening on a weekly basis for anybody in Berlin who's dealing with trauma, stress, but also addiction, can come and get pay what you can ear acupuncture. And yeah, that's mostly what I'm doing. And I'm taking private clients online. Maybe you can add to show notes my website. That would be sweet.
Absolutely. We'll add it to the show notes. If anyone needs
Yeah.
some coaching, some contact nutrition and attunement, or some mental health support, we will definitely hook you up. Thank you so much for being on the show, Mishka. Thank you for being in the world. Thank you for being in my world.
I'm so happy to be in your world.
In the show notes for today's episode, you'll find links to Aurelie's website and her scheduler if you'd like to book a one-on-one with her for some coaching or mentorship. As well, you'll find the link to the anarcho-queer feminist health collective she belongs to in Berlin. I hear they're taking new members if you're in that vicinity. Okay, my listener shout out today. First of all, thank you so much to folks who leave reviews in your podcast player. Well, honestly, anyone who leaves reviews on the internet, I super appreciate it. Doesn't matter what it's for. It really helps, for me anyway, so much with like helping the algorithm find the right listeners for the Numinous podcast. And if you don't mind like saying a few kind words, just that like extra little step of writing a few words after you tap the 5 stars, that really helps so much. So special thanks today to my listener, Rachel Sage, who gave the show 5 stars and titled their review, "So Applicable." Rachel Sage writes, "From collapse awareness to somatics to attachment styles and relationships and more, I love listening to Carmen's podcast. It helps me feel grounded and expands my mind." Oh, grounded and expanded. I love it. Thank you so much, Rachel Sage. You can also leave feedback for me at castfeedback.com/Numinous podcast. Like, you could ask me a question, you can write me a note, you can leave me a voicemail, you can make a show topic suggestion, all of that stuff you can do at castfeedback.com/Numinous podcast, and I'll link to that in the show notes too. Okay, here's our little coda on moral injury. So friends, the moral injury course is opening soon in the Numinous Network. And I first became interested in moral injury at the outset of the pandemic. And the result of all the research was the Numinous Network. But now, with so many months of witnessing genocide on our phones, now with the ramping up of state violence against the people, with the intensity coalescing around the American election this fall, and with a summer of climate impacts surely ahead of us, man, we need a space to express our moral outrage and metabolize our feelings of helplessness, don't we? Don't we? We do. I think we do. So what is moral injury exactly? Well, a morally injurious event is something that you did or didn't do, happened or didn't happen to you and maybe should, or didn't happen to you and you have some survivor's guilt over it, that kind of thing. Or it's something that you witnessed or you heard about after the fact. And the key thing is that this thing violates your deeply held values in a high stakes situation. Now, the frontline treatment for this, the frontline psychological treatment for moral injury, as well as a range of other issues, is cognitive behavioral therapy. And CBT gets that's like the first line thing they're going to offer you for like anxiety, depression, addiction, disordered eating, low self-esteem. CBT focuses on changing thoughts and feelings. So one works to change one's thoughts about a situation in order to influence different outcomes and behaviors. So it's very structured, and it's designed to help clients address problem behaviors and to achieve specific goals. So it's what we call a top-down approach. In other words, it relies heavily on cognitive functioning and verbal expression and instrumental thinking, like your prefrontal cortex, your executive functioning. And the reason it's a first-line psychological treatment is primarily because it's evidence-based, meaning there have been a lot of peer-reviewed studies. And it's true, the evidence of CBT is quite strong. So I looked it up in a recent review looking at 11 studies that compared response rates between CBT and other treatments. CBT showed higher response rates in 7 of these studies. Now, 3 of them showed more or less equal effectiveness, and only 1 review reported that CBT had a lower response rate in comparison to other treatments. However, big all capitals, however, a critical drawback is that no meta-analytic studies of CBT have been reported on specific subgroups, such as ethnic minorities or low-income samples. So in other words, subgroups that are more likely to experience significant trauma coupled with oppressed identities and socially down power roles. Okay, this is a lot of jargon, this is a lot of words, but here's the main line of it. In my opinion, people with significant trauma, and I include here those who live with chronic illness, as well as people who are neurodivergent And people who experience significant oppression are often not good candidates for this type of treatment unless it follows a course of somatic therapy. So, just think about what I said, okay? CBT relies heavily on cognitive functioning, verbal expression, prefrontal cortex, instrumental thinking, executive functioning. Polyvagal theory tells us, and this is supported by neuroscience, that we need both a top-down and a bottom-up approach to resolve trauma because the brain simply doesn't function well when it's in fight, flight, freeze, or appease mode. So when that's the state of the brain, then CBT is like cosmetic improvements in a home when what you really need is a renovation, right? It's like painting over cracked plaster, like it's not going to hold. So somatic therapies are more like a renovation. They support the physical discharge of pent-up stress and trauma response. And then that in turn enables the reshaping of the autonomic nervous system to be more resilient, or sort of technically I might say support a greater range of regulatory flexibility. The idea around having a bottom up and a top down is again because of the function of the brain. The body's memory is just as important as the brain's memory of a traumatic event. Like the brain, how the brain's memory functions, or rather fails to function under stress, is so critical to how we approach trauma recovery. So personally, I don't think CBT is appropriate for like a lot of us unless there's a foundation of somatic therapies first. Somatic approaches are appropriate for people with or without trauma histories. And so I think this is why starting with a somatic approach and then titrating the stress, in my opinion, that's a preferable approach to moral injury. We start by learning how to discharge small, tolerable amounts of stress. We pendulate to resources and develop that internal sense of safeness before we move on to cognitive approaches. Now, cognitive approaches are helpful. They're a way to underscore meaning making. They promote post-traumatic growth. They develop frameworks for new behavior, but they don't work unless your brain is ready. So if you have brain fog, if you feel emotionally overwhelmed, if you feel mentally overwhelmed, CBT is not going to stick. So in other words, we have to become resourced enough to be able to undertake the work of like reshaping our brain for improved cognitive and behavioral functioning. Okay, that's a lot of me talking. I sometimes do that. I'll do that partially in the course, but mostly we'll be doing exercises. We'll lay a somatic foundation. We'll start shaping the nervous system. We'll kind of get the brain laddered up. We'll scaffold up the brain so that it can then do some of the other top-down practices. Moral injury, this course, it's coming to the Numinous Network in late June, but I highly recommend you join us now in the network so you can learn and practice some of the skills that will be woven into the course. So those somatic exercises like therapeutic tremoring and practices that support vagal tone. Also, what supports vagal tone is the music listening program, the Safe and Sound Protocol. This was developed by the neuroscientist behind polyvagal theory, Dr. Stephen Porges. And all of this is included with membership in the Numinous Network. So the moral injury course has these bottom-up approaches like hypnotherapy, embodied attachment, mind-body centering, mindfulness and somatics. And then we weave them in with top-down approaches from CBT, like expressive writing, acceptance and commitment therapy, which is in like the family of behavioral therapies. And all of that is under the umbrella of the power, threat, meaning framework. So we bring into it a lot of awareness of power, rank, and privilege. So join us now in the Numinous Network to lay a foundation for your recovery from moral injury and trauma, and you can get all the details at carmenspagnola.com. CarmenSpagnola. Until next time, take care.